Increasing prices and interest rates. These days, it's difficult to discuss the economy without bringing up the word inflation. But here in Switzerland, a little mountainous country in Western Europe, the rise in costs has been far less pronounced while many nations around the world struggle with extremely high inflation. Over the past year, have you experienced the effects of price increases and inflation? Not really that much. It's been fine thus far. In most cases, everything is okay. Do you believe that Switzerland is somehow doing things better than perhaps other countries? In my opinion, 3.5% in 2022 marked a 29-year high for inflation in Switzerland. Although it is still high by Swiss standards, it is significantly lower than the double-digit inflation rates in other major economies like the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Eurozone. What, therefore, is it in the Swiss economy that has prevented it from experiencing severe inflation, and what can other nations learn from it? The tale of Switzerland's inflation has many moving aspects. To begin with, prices in the nation are starting from a high base. Switzerland is among the richest nations in the world, with a GDP per capita higher than that of other developed nations like the United States, Japan, and Germany. With an average adult wealth of close to $700,000 and a high cost of living to match, it is also home to some of the wealthiest people in the world. The Swiss cities of Zurich and Geneva continued to rank among the top 10 most expensive cities in the world in 2022, despite increases in living expenses in other pricey locations like Singapore, New York, and Tel Aviv due to inflation. Professor of Modern and Economic History at the University of Zurich, Tobias Straumann. Because people are generally extremely wealthy, food does not account for as much of a household's overall budget as it may in other nations. Of course, there is disparity as well. Yet from a global standpoint, I believe our social policy is really effective. Because they tend to spend a less percentage of their income on necessities compared to discretionary things like holidays and hobbies, which they can cut back on when prices rise, Swiss individuals are therefore typically less affected by price increases. The strong Swiss currency is another factor in Switzerland's relative pricing stability. The nation's currency has also been slowly gaining strength, increasing in value relative to the euro to equal it in 2022. Yet in 2022, despite the instability in Europe, the Swiss franc remained stable while the US dollar gained strength against several other important currencies. That's largely because it serves as a defensive asset or safe haven currency. The Swiss franc is strongly backed by sizable gold, bond, and financial asset reserves that aid the Swiss National Bank in maintaining the currency's stability during volatile times. It actually began nearly 100 years ago, following World War I, and has always been a safe haven currency in times of crisis. The Swiss franc was once again in high demand due to the war, other events, especially COVID. The stability of its currency is particularly advantageous for its economy, which depends significantly on commerce with other countries. The majority of the $300 billion in products and services that Swiss imported in 2020 were from EU neighbors. It actually began nearly 100 years ago, following World War I, and has always been a safe haven currency in times of crisis. The Swiss franc was once again in high demand due to the war, other events, especially COVID. The stability of its currency is particularly advantageous for its economy, which depends significantly on commerce with other countries. In Switzerland, which has more than 1,500 lakes and hundreds of rivers, hydropower is a major source of energy. Moreover, a tenth of Switzerland's energy needs are met by hydroelectricity, making it less dependent on imported oil and gas than some of its European neighbors. The majority of Swiss energy suppliers are also held by the public, which reduces their exposure to significant market volatility and makes them subject to stricter pricing regulations. Although Switzerland is often thought of as a fairly liberal nation, there is actually quite a bit of official control on our rates. The Hotel Piz Buenclosters in the east of Switzerland is managed by Jean-Claude Huber. According to him, standardizing long-term energy contracts has protected companies like his from escalating rates in 2023. He's not concerned this year because the contract expires at the end of the year. After then, it will presumably climb by a factor of 5, making this a significant increase. They'll have to manage it, though. Because of the flexible pricing at the 4-star hotel, Huber has been able to raise prices by about 5 to 10% without affecting demand. They can handle it and play with the prices much more than if you always had fixed rates, and that is quite beneficial to us. Because these folks are so much more price sensitive, they will have a lot more issues with 2 or 3-star hotels. Switzerland has strict price controls on goods and services in addition to energy, making them less vulnerable to changes brought on by inflation. More than any other nation in Europe, Switzerland regulates prices for over 1/3 of the key goods used to gauge inflation in the Eurozone, including food, housing, and transportation. Due to high taxes on specific agricultural imports, domestically produced items like milk and cheese are also more favorably priced and less susceptible to changes in the global food markets. We strive to get as much that is Swiss, but even regional, which entails buying things like bread, milk, and other items locally. You want a local industry to be operational for the long run. Farmers are necessary, thus it's critical that they can sell their goods. Swiss food prices increased at an annualized pace of 4.0% in December 2022. Compare it to 11.9% in the United States, 16.9% in the United Kingdom, and 19.8% in Germany. In a restaurant, we may easily adjust the food expenses to raise the price of the meals. Yet, we are also being cautious because you shouldn't exaggerate. Despite all of this, consumers in Switzerland have not been completely shielded from recent price increases. Some claim that the pinch is more acute than ever. What area has it affected you the most? Power and energy costs. The cost of some groceries has increased. As usual, the victims are those with little incomes or earnings, and they are the ones who are most affected. The Central Bank of Switzerland announced that it now anticipates inflation to average 2.4% in 2023 before decreasing to 1.8% in 2024. Even in a little recessionary scenario, people are still entering the country, which naturally stabilizes demand. And I anticipate the same thing for 2023, this year, and possibly 2024 as well. If anything, what do you believe other nations can learn from the Swiss example? Because we have the euro and the euro needs to take into account all countries, exchange rate policy is extremely challenging to replicate. And I believe that for some nations, an appreciation may be beneficial for import prices but detrimental to exports. Who owns the generation of energy is the subject here. To make it more resilient and to have a long-term owner that genuinely cares about the consumer, it could be a good idea to consider renationalizing at least some of it. In other parts of Europe, there was a definite shift towards privatization, which was a great concept in the medium to short term but is not very resilient, and they are still troubled by these choices today. Many at the time believed the Swiss to be overly conservative. But looking back, I'd say that was a wise choice.